As a CEO and fashion authority, I know it's the details that truly matter. And when it comes to luxury, every stitch must be perfectly tailored. At Genesis, they've delivered on every element of the GV80. Two-line LED headlamps accentuate an exterior that exudes athletic elegance. Inside, discover an expansive cabin with ambient lighting. Take a close look at the Genesis GV80 and you'll see Luxe is in the details. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel Zoe, and you're listening to Climbing in Heels. This show is all about celebrating the most extraordinary superwomen who will be sharing their incredible journeys to the top, all while staying glamorous. Today with me, I'm joined by the most incredible entrepreneur and co-founder of Seed Probiotics, Ara Katz. Ara has the most amazing story from very early in her career as a film producer to building a tech startup and eventually co-founding her massively successful business, Seed. From losing her mother in her teens to leaning into her interest in human biology, Ara's journey is truly, truly inspiring. You will not want to miss a minute of this one. So let's get right into it. I'm very excited to talk to you, but I do like to just touch a little bit on the beginning just because I think it's important to understand like who you were, like where you grew up and what kind of kid were you? Were you like shy and super academic, which I would imagine?
So I was, you know what? I wasn't. I was like a little adult. I was like, but loved play. I mean, loved play and loved, I built things.
Interesting.
I built and made a lot of things.
Okay.
In a lot of ways, look, I've considered myself an artist. Like
Right.
I've always been, all I did was like create and build things and maybe more a designer is a better way to think about that, which is I was the kid that was a really good athlete. So sports was a really big part of my life.
Okay. Discipline.
But so was building and so was academics. But academics were never hard for me.
Right.
So
You didn't try at it.
I wasn't try. Yeah, I didn't try,
It's like Roger.
but I really excelled. And that was not the part. I never had anxiety about academics ever.
Right.
I think I loved learning.
Right.
And I loved immersing. And I never had a challenge. Like I wasn't like worried about a test or stressed out about it because I really deeply knew the material, or I really always felt like I got that part. Yeah. Sports was a big part of just like having early confidence and just being able to, and I was really a tomboy, like for sure in elementary school, tomboy.
And you grew up in New York? Where'd you grow up?
In New York, yeah. And I was a tomboy. I was in public school until 6th grade, until a teacher who really saw me and really understood me. I started to get very bored starting in 4th grade, and I started to act out because I was so bored.
Which is what happens.
And Mrs. Edie Tenzer, who was the head of the gifted program at my school, came to my parents, and I had a beautiful relationship with her. And she came to my parents and she said, "You got to get this kid out of here. I love her, but I can't." And going to her gifted program was like the highlight of my day. It was like we would build oceans. I got to immerse to independent study projects. Like I got to really learn. And then most of my weekends were spent, me and my dad would make movies. I learned, my dad was a photographer. So like I was just, and he was an athlete too. So it was like an interesting, like obviously like a lot of sports, but also like we just, every Saturday and Sunday morning, we were making movies or we were building things. It was when I would build a lot of models. Like I wanted to be an architect.
Wow.
I learned very early on how to make balsa wood models of things. So I would emulate Frank Lloyd Wright houses and I would make my parents take me to
totally normal for an 11, 12-year-old, right?
It was just like, but I also had a very early, and this is maybe not always maybe a positive, it didn't serve me then, but certainly I think served me in life, which is a lot of parenting stuff is you see so much, especially now because there's so much parenting content out there. I was the kid that was like super rebellious. I had a lot of conviction and I pretty much didn't understand the word no. And I wasn't spoiled at all. I wasn't like a brat. It was just that if someone said that you can't do something, I was like, I will do that now. But you said that.
But I think that, to your point, I think that's exactly who you are. And that's, I think
Absolutely.
I think most CEOs would probably say they're not people that accept no, right?
Yeah.
That's not really an option. My dad used to say that about me. Like, you could sell anything to anyone and no is not an option. And
That's
I
right.
never really understood what he meant until I got older and would look back and be like, whatever. Like, they wanted to send me to private school. And I was like, no, I don't want to go. There's too much homework. And then like
Yeah.
they didn't, and they actually listened to me. And I'm like, why'd you listen to me? And my parents were like, because the hell that you would have put us through for the
Right.
next 6 years. I didn't want to go here. So I was like, okay. Because it wasn't really cool back then to listen to your kids.
Yeah, no, not at all. And I also, and I do remember it's funny, like I think back, like, yeah, I was really rebellious when I finally did get put. It was interesting too, because I started my first little business in 4th grade. I was an impact business. I was selling rainforest t-shirts to give back to an organization that was doing conservation work. My dad and my family was very into like nature conservation and environmental stuff in nature, everything. I remember like I would sell this. I remember just feeling that the agency that came from like having your own business. And it was interesting. And it really did come out of the fact that my parents really were not good with money. Like I grew up like middle class,
Yeah.
but I was surrounded by extraordinary wealth.
Of course.
And so I think it gave me a crazy hustle. Like that chip on your shoulder can and I wasn't like angry about it.
Yeah.
But I definitely was like, I am never going to be in this place
Yep.
ever. And if I ever have children, they are not going to feel like this.
Interesting.
And I definitely had, like, I used to like when I don't know if you remember, of course you remember this because of remember the turning point in like denim where all of a sudden denim was $100. Right?
Yes.
Like,
by the way, at best, it was $100.
At best, right. But like 7 jeans, right? If you remember when that kind of all happened.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
in $250.
Yeah, it's exactly. But even it was interesting. I do remember that just because I had to like not eat at lunch at school to save money so that I could buy, right? And it was just interesting, like where I would figure out how to like make money. And so it was just interesting because like I think it just gave me, you can have all the things we're talking about, but I also think I always sometimes think about, but where, as a creative person, like where did the hustle come from?
Of course.
Because you can have drive and you can like, yes, in sports, you can want to win.
Sure.
But there is like a kind of hustle that I do think came from that period of time when I went into a private school and I was just surrounded by so much that it's like a brand new world.
And what school was that?
I went to Harseman in
Jesus.
the city.
You were like,
it was like,
babe, you were like in the heart of Gossip Girl.
Oh, I just, 1,000%. It was interesting. Now, you have to remember, I was never, it was not, yes, it was eye-opening from that perspective, but I loved it because it felt like I was going to college.
Yeah, of course.
Like the teacher, like the education was like.
The caliber of everything.
The caliber of education was like, I was like, you could have these conversations with teachers. And I think, and again, like a lot of the rich kids that were there were like always complaining about homework and complaining about it. And I'm just like, yo, like,
bring it on. This is a gift.
This is great. This is crazy. And I just remember and I know how hard my parents worked to figure that out, and I financial aid and all the other things.
And to have such an appreciation as an adult.
Oh, like 1,000%. That I really credit. I say to my dad, my mom died when I was 16, but I say to my dad all the time that decision changed the trajectory of my life.
Wow.
It really did. And it wasn't just because of the education. I think it was because of the hustle I got.
Yeah.
I think it was because of the exposure. I think it was because I wasn't bored anymore. I wasn't acting out. Not to say I was like a not acting out teenager, but
I think that's important, actually, your point, because I think we see it so much in kids now. And it's kids that are so intelligent, that are not challenged enough, act out. And then they get labeled. They get 100 labels of ADHD or they're dyslexic or and by the way, many of them may be true or not true, but a lot of times it's just an extremely intelligent kid who's bored out of their mind and is too young to express the fact that they're bored. And to your point, I think I think there are kids that really need what you clearly needed. And I think that the motivators, because it's definitely a question like where your ambition comes from. And I love what you said earlier, because I have a very successful friend, entrepreneur, I watched her go from being an assistant in like PR to basically being a CEO of 3 companies and all this stuff. And she comes from nothing, like ghettos of London. And she had multiple siblings. And she was like, I was so clear from the age of 9 that I was never going to live like this as an adult, and that my children would never feel like I feel right now. And so I think that in and of itself, but you had wonderful parents and still have wonderful father. But
Yeah,
so it's not about love. It's just about what's around you and what you
absolutely.
need. But it's interesting. So then, okay, so you go through school, you're in private school all through till you go to college, and you went to
Going to Tufts.
such a good
I
school.
never saw it till the day I got there. But my mom died. My mom died when everyone was going to college, and that was another thing, right? Like, I get the
That'll destroy
embarrassment,
you.
have $1,000 an hour, like college counselors,
Yeah.
and obviously, well, there's been some disruption in that,
Yeah,
I
a
think,
little bit.
given some of the things that have happened
Uh-huh.
since then. But like everyone getting SAT tutor, and so I
Yeah.
actually just never went through that process because my mom was dying,
Hmm.
and so I never got to see colleges. I never really, and so Tufts offered me to play tennis there. And
Wow.
so I went for tennis, and my mom's two best friends, who were like my
Yeah.
godmothers, were both in Boston. So I felt like a
Yeah.
little bit of a softer landing.
Yeah.
When I look back at going to school, it was funny because I didn't going to high school in New York. I did a lot of things very early
Right.
growing up in New York. I think a lot of New
Yeah.
York kids, a
Grow up
lot of like
real
big
quick.
city kids. Yeah, you grow up real quick.
Real quick.
So I had done like a lot of the things that a lot of people do in college for the first time
Mhm.
by the time I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I got to school, I was like, no, I don't like get blackout drunk. I'm like, I'm here. I'm
Right.
just like, I'm ready to work. I'm just ready to like make things and be in the world. And so
Yes.
I was just like, I was done. And so I really just wanted to work. And so I would just like intern all the time. I would build my own I built my own minor. I was just like always working. I spent most Friday, Saturday nights, like honestly in the library, like watching films and learning. Like
And
I
what
just,
about social? Did you have a lot of friends or not so much?
my mom had just died. And so I did have friends, and I had a lot of friends in the Greek system, and I had a lot of friends outside of that system. I tried to be in a sorority, which is, I look back
Not for
sometimes
me.
I think I maybe lasted like 20 a second.
Right.
But it was really just, I think, an effort to try and feel a little community.
Yeah.
My mom had just died, but that was definitely not for me. And I think that I've always been like a loner that has a lot of good friends,
Mhm.
but not like big groups of friends
Right.
together.
Right.
That's always been when I
Yeah.
look back at like the pattern of my life. So I've
Yeah.
never had that like one group, which is something that I think is a beautiful thing when it happens, but just for whatever reason, it hasn't been
Yeah.
the way my friendships have developed. And so I did have a lot of really good friendships, but they were not like, I wasn't like, had my crew
Right.
at all, so to speak. And I also ended up dating someone really seriously starting like my junior year. So he was in Boston and I'm not at Tufts. So I was with him quite a
Right.
bit. Yeah, I was born that way. I think it's why I always spent so much time and really gravitated towards the grown-ups and adults when I was younger. I
Yep.
just would like always love to spend time with grown-ups and learn, and I just always felt much more connected to grown-ups when I was younger.
When did so you've always had, and by the way, I very much relate to it. If my parents were like, you don't have to go to college, you can just start working,
Yeah.
I would have 100% taken that, 1,000%. I was so much more interested in that. And, I would
Me too.
argue to say that I learned more in the first 6 months of working,
Huh.
than I did in school. But so then you didn't go to grad school, right? You didn't do any of that.
I didn't go to grad school, but I did 2 fellowships and programs. I ended up during high school, during college, I did teach myself to code websites. So that was the way that I was like making
Sounds
money.
exactly like what I was doing in
Yeah.
college.
So I was always like into tech. I was always
Yeah.
into tech. Like my whole life, I've been like obsessed with technology and like design. And so I did learn, and also just, it was how I would make money. Like
Right.
people pay me to make their websites.
Yep.
And so I learned graphic design. I learned tech. I learned just like basic coding at that time. Of course, what I used to have to code, of course, now you can just go to Canva or whatever
Right.
website and make
Right.
it yourself.
Of
But
course.
you used to have to code all of those things in HTML, which is what I used to do. And so I would have like clients and stuff during school. And so
Enjoyed this, right? You like loved it.
yeah. Oh, I love building. I just love building things. I just love building things and like design. Yeah. I love doing design, but I did after school. So after working for a while, I did a visiting fellowship at the MIT Media Lab, and I helped establish a group there called the Center for the Future of Storytelling, which is really, I think, become the through line of my career, which is like just the interest storytelling being like a weird word for like design, tech, like how you translate things,
Sure.
really complex things to people. And of course, how you tell and make that connect on a human level. And then I also did a CCA fellowship in human-centered design as well. So those were like formal grad school,
You're
grad
such
students,
an
but-
underachiever, Ara.
Yeah,
what
but
the hell?
but it was interesting. I fell into some of the, wouldn't want anyone listening to this to think that I somehow plotted this on a chart. I think there are some people who are like, I have goals and this is how I'm going to achieve.
Yeah, I'm not that person.
It happened all of this
organically.
happened, or I think beautifully unfolded and compounded on itself to reveal over time. Because during this period of time, I was really mostly working in like Hollywood, making film. I was making movies during this period of time. And I started in media. I just happened to be able to I was early in media, but also early in tech. So like Hollywood hadn't caught up to tech. So I ended up having a skill set that made my work in design and tech different, unique at that time, because Hollywood and the film world was very late to that space.
Right. So so let's talk about that for a second. Let's talk about being early.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
Because timing really is everything. And sometimes early and being the first or being one of the first is not always the greatest, right? And I get asked that question a lot. And there are real pros and real cons sometimes. And I'm curious, how after school so you moved out here right away? You came to California?
No, I was going back and forth between New York, Boston, and LA because I started independent film producing basically in school.
Right.
And I was able to start as a producer just simply because I learned that kind of the hustle. I was able to raise money from people early. I was just
That's
able to raise
by
capital.
the way.
No,
that's a gift.
Trust me, I've come to really
That's
understand
really
that.
a gift.
Yes. So I was able to raise money. And so I was able to just start as a producer. I didn't work for anyone. I did have internships. I did intern at a bunch of film companies, but I never really had a job. I started producing right out of school, during school, and then just continued after school. And it was interesting. Speaking of first, I ended up, and I don't know if you remember this, I ended up meeting and becoming embedded in this group of young South American filmmakers. And I loved film. Film was my, as I said, I would sit in the library.
I didn't know that about you. I did not know that.
Film has always been, I was a filmmaker.
I think of you as techie science.
Yeah, no, but film was really my first, and was my, I think started as my first love. And that really came from honestly, a lot of high school. I learned that sitting in a dark room with movies was a therapy for me. It was connecting to the human experience in a way that no other art form does it for me. I love and have appreciation for music and art, but film to me is a journey that I think has always stuck with me. And you see it in a lot of the things I've done even outside of film. And so I ended up embedded early on this group of South American filmmakers. And it was right when, if you remember, when Alfonso Cuarón and all these Inarritu, all these big filmmakers, no one had heard of these people. No one, Inarritu, Amores Perros, and all these early movies, no one knew any of these filmmakers.
No.
And I ended up producing a this young Bolivian filmmaker that was part of that crew. I ended up producing his first film. And it went on to be the first film that was ever nominated, and ever submitted for an Oscar from the country of Bolivia, which was crazy. And it was just this amazing, and it just launched me into the world of mostly the independent world. But at that time, the independent film world was the thing.
Yeah,
it was really, you remember Sundance.
Yeah, of course. It was the Spirit Awards, which I feel really talks about now.
No. And so that was just that was my world for a long time. And I made a bunch of films. I produced, if you remember, Paris Je t'aime, Paris I Love You, and made all these crazy interesting movies. And I put Emma Stone in one of her first films.
It's just a fun fact that I never knew about you, ever possible.
It's crazy. Yeah, you can do on IMDb.
Okay, but wait, so how did you flip? Because I feel that's a whole. So what was the
I'll tell you.
pivot?
Yeah, I can tell you. So I had produced the last film that I produced. So there was a book that changed my life in high school. And it was called The People's History of the United States. And it was written by Howard Zinn. Okay. Do you remember the scene in Good Will Hunting when Robin Williams takes a book off the shelf and hands it to Matt Damon, and he says, "You want to read a real book?
Yeah.
This book will knock you on your ass."
Yeah.
That book is, Matt Damon had the rights to it forever with Ben Affleck because they both knew Howard Zinn from Boston. And Howard Zinn is one of the most extraordinary professors who has always taught the true history of this country. And I read it in Mr. Giavaris' class in 11th grade at Horace Mann. It changed my fucking life.
Wow.
And I remember, and so I had the opportunity to go produce. Matt and Ben had been trying to get that made for a very long time. I had become friendly with Chris Moore. If you remember Project Greenlight, and Chris met, and then they had all done that together. And I became friendly with Chris, and Chris said, "Come make this with me." And we were working. We did it out of J.J. Abrams' offices, and so this movie was Bob Dylan, Bruce Springsteen, like Lupe Fiasco, like John Legend, like
My
Josh
God.
Brolin, Viggo Mortensen, Marissa Tomei, Kerry Washington. It was like every extraordinary artist that Eddie Vedder that I ever would want to work with. And I was like, I can drop the mic now.
Right.
And so we made the film. I was working at J. Abrams' offices. And I think that at the same time, there had been some really interesting, and this is around the time when I met you actually, because I had always had my fingers in tech,
Mm-hmm.
but this was when MySpace had just sold to Rupert Murdoch
Yep.
and News Corp.
Yep.
And my friend, a couple of guys that I knew were working out of the incubator that Rupert Murdoch had set up, or that News Corp had set up to say what's next in tech.
Sure.
I think thinking about like the evolution of all their news platforms, et cetera. And they're just like, we need to go create. The guys, a lot of the tech guys who had started like MySpace were like, why don't you come with us? We're going to do the big, we're going to start something in e-commerce. And I was like, I just want to get out. I now have made the film I wanted to make, but I also really had the tech bug. And I was like, why don't I just do it with the people who started MySpace? That sounds interesting.
Wow.
And that's when we started Beachman. And they literally flew up north, got $5 million from NEA, came back. And I was on the founding team. We the rest, but that was my education. Not that I cared about,
God.
not that I cared about, as you know me, I was the customer.
Yeah,
because for anyone who doesn't know listening, we had worked with a number of celebrities to really start these different brands and subscription commerce brands in different verticals with Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen, and Kate Bosworth was probably the most successful. That was in jewelry.
Got it.
And so that was like my first, and I just got to build the whole thing with them. And it was really exciting, exceptional experience. Again, not that it was the thing that was like what my heart was like aligned with putting out in the world, but it was like the most extraordinary experience. And I learned so much about tech. I learned so much about building on the internet. I got to take all of my filmmaking, create all this content, really understand like the content commerce, how people buy things online. It was really my interweb experience. I understood like technology before then, but that was like internet in a way that it was very different than what I knew.
And you weren't married yet, Ara, right?
No, I hadn't.
I was totally single at this point.
I wasn't. Yes,
or whatever.
Yeah.
Unmarried.
Exactly at the beginning of that. Exactly. I had met. Actually, it's interesting. I had met when I was working at J. Abrams' offices. My now husband and father of 2 children came over there for lunch to meet me for a meeting, which is like a business meeting. That's how we met.
Get out of here. Of course you would meet your husband at a business meeting.
In a business meeting.
That would make perfect sense. Like how to set Ara up with a guy.
Yeah, it's incredibly
cliche. For a meeting.
Totally. It was very cliche. And it was funny because he also was in tech, and he had started Vidi at the time, which was like it was, if you remember, Vidi and Vine came up around the same time. They had this huge offer from Twitter. Like they had like 100 million. I mean, it was just like we were both kind of riding this like tech wave. It was a crazy experience. And then I really had the opportunity. I think I'd gotten that to a certain place, and I realized that was when the iPhone was really like blowing up, and I really had this itch to really understand like the mobile world. They talk about being first, right? It was like, and even in e-commerce, I was like very early first. It was incredibly exciting, like subscription, like these new way of doing things. Then it was like the phone was coming along, and I've always was like, oh, this is going to 0 to 1 everything. This is going to fundamentally change the way we do everything. And so I founded with 3 co-founders in New York. I founded Spring, which was this mobile commerce company. And that was I got to launch Apple Pay with Apple. We were up there on the screen with the first 15 brands on the Apple keynote. And it was super exciting. And I got to really understand and learn mobile, which I think was incredibly interesting. But again, another thing where it was like selling things and doing something that I did it for the intellectual, like, oh, this is interesting. I want to understand
this is challenging my brain.
I don't care about helping people buy things online. Like it was like, so it felt, and I'm only saying that because I definitely did things that I felt were not necessarily from an alignment perspective. It wasn't like, oh, this is like a thing I want to put out in the world, but there was absolutely an intellectual, a deep understanding that it was like this learning. It was like this constant continual learning.
Because I was going to say that about you. I think there is something slightly contradictory about an obsession with tech and an obsession with film and an obsession with building. And because it's funny, everything about you, like obviously your obsession with learning and challenging your mind. And I think this like amazing admiration for tech, right? So I totally get that because tech is something that has transformed all of our lives in every possible way. But you, the person that I know, it's like you would be the person that would still like handwrite everything if you could, or like never carry a plastic bottle or, everything. And not that's tech, but I guess what I'm saying is like, I would see you still on an actual typewriter if there was an option, just because that fits your.
It's a
so
really
you're a
funny
little oxymoron.
I know. It's funny. It's that it's funny. Like I want Starlink, but live in the forest, right? It's an interesting
dichotomy
there, but that's partially why I like to understand these things. I never wanted technology to happen to me. I wanted to play a role in figuring out how it was going to get
block and
harnessed in some
tackle.
way. Yeah, but it was also it wasn't even like defensive as much as I think that there's a beautiful quote that I will botch that like that I think it was Carl Sagan said, we live in a society that we don't fully understand.
Yes.
And I think that I think there's another quote that he did not say, someone else said, which is we have these Paleolithic minds living in a world that very small percent of us actually fundamentally understand. Yeah. And it's not really a contradiction when you think about what I care about existentially,
right?
Which is like and it goes back to film, which is I deeply want to understand the human experience.
Right.
And I would be the pioneer. It's like when you're hiking, it's like there's always someone at the front, right?
Yeah.
And I want to be that person at the front because it's the pioneering that I think actually is like the most interesting to me. And whether that is launching Apple Pay or just being at the front of the hike.
Yeah.
I think and there's an existential need for me not to be like, oh, I don't want the technology to take over me.
Sure.
Like it's much more of I want to so deeply understand these things because I actually believe that they can then ultimately make a tremendous impact in our lives. They need to be humanized and they need to be like deeply understood to be able to do that. And you're definitely right that there's like it would seem to be like a very kind of like dichotomy of like contradiction, mm-hmm. But in a lot of ways, like it's funny, like there's certain things that I want to be very efficient at, like communication, right? Like time and like how you think about those things. But then I also really, the building piece is very fascinating to me, mm-hmm. and the way that you like really think about creating and understanding your context. Look, we see it play out every single day right now, right? The algorithms are controlling like our entire understanding and experience of what's happening in the world right now.
I know. As a CEO, fashion authority, and mom, I know it's the details that truly matter. And when it comes to luxury, every stitch must be perfectly tailored. That's why driving the sleek Genesis GV80 is such a luxurious experience. The SUV's exterior design, including 2-line LED headlamps, exudes athletic elegance. When you sit inside the expansive GV80 cabin, you can customize the ambient interior lighting to match your current mood, a feature that makes driving in LA a more relaxed and serene experience. So go ahead, take a close look at the Genesis GV80, and you'll see Luxe is in the details.
Like our children, we are all, and by the way, we're all consuming this on advertising platforms. Ugh. So if you really and our whole realities are constructed. And so for me, like it is actually all very existentially the same, because I feel like when you pioneer things, you can feel and be at the forefront of something that at least even in my own little way guides it towards what I hope it could be.
And you're not letting it take you. You're taking it.
Absolutely. And it would never just be, look at AI right now, right? Like
terrifying.
That's what everybody says.
Terrifying.
Right? Yeah. Because that's the first response. If you don't immerse yourself in it and start to deeply understand
it's less
what
scary.
Is it? How is it? Right. And then it's the same thing with what we're experiencing in world events. Yes. The people who are sitting back and taking a second to deeply understand. And then there's, of course, the immune response that is happening. I
don't want to talk about the immune response. I'm going to get all fired. No, but
no, of course. But of course, everybody gets all fired up. And it's really, you're right. And it's an interesting contradiction that you'd think, but it's also the pioneering piece and being at the front of things is something that could feel like very tacky and then contradictory to, I care about the environment, or I don't care. I carry this water bottle.
But
there's look, technology is going to save our planet.
Yes.
We have to invest in early stage science and technology to find the things that are going to sequester carbon.
Yep.
To find the
That's
things
true.
that are
Yep.
so like to me, like you have to deeply understand these things, because those are the things that are also going to save us.
Yeah.
And
Agree.
really meaningfully. And so in a lot of ways, like I see why you would think it's very contradictory,
Well,
but
it's
to
funny.
me,
You
it
are,
feels very.
but it does go back to what you originally said, which is you are a designer, you are an artist, you are a creator. And I want to go to one of the most important things because I think it's such a big part of who you are and how I got to know you even better, which is seed.
Yes.
And I want to talk about it because I think it's so important. It's years ago, there was all this outbreak of probiotics, these gummies. Oh my God, if you can take these, it'll change your digestion, it'll change your stomach, it'll change your whole being, your skin, and this and that. And of course, we all buy all these chewy gummies filled with sugar, give them to our kids, give them to whatever. And then we get on the phone with you and you proceed to tell Roger and I, like, okay, hey, and you start breaking down, and all of a sudden, this big word that I feel like for you is like saying hello, microbiome. But I also think seed combines all your passions and all your things, right? But it is so vastly different and groundbreaking in every possible way, from science, and obviously like it broke down many walls in many things and is unlike any other product out there, which is why it's been so successful. But it's funny because I was talking to my producer earlier and she was like, one of the greatest things about seed is when someone takes it. So the packaging, which I want to talk about as well at some point, is it's so unique, right? So seed is such an important message and it's so impactful. And I think it's product first, right? But I think what's so cool about it is not only does it work, but it's also cool to take seed. And that's like a very hard thing to do. And we've seen really prominent people, not paid, taking the seed and living and swearing by seed. And it's funny because she said to me, I know who takes seed. You see it in their Instagrams because it's like on their counter and you can see it, you know? So it's very interesting. So I want to talk about seed and why you started seed because I think it's really important. I think everyone, if they don't know about seed, should know about seed.
Yes. The part of my trajectory that we didn't talk about that will make seed snap to some sort of grid in the story is that in high school, so it was really interesting. My mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 48 years old, which is like both very early, very unusual
very
for a woman. She lasted 361 days from diagnosis to dying. And ironically, and interestingly, she worked at Memorial Sloan Kettering, ironically, which if anyone knows, is one of the greatest cancer hospitals and institutions in the world. But what had happened during that period of time, and I would say even maybe prior to that a little bit, just because I was an athlete, is that I had developed like an extraordinary fascination with like human health, with like our bodies. And I really was so fascinated. And in high school, when she was sick, I learned to read, I learned to research clinical trials, and I learned to read scientific papers. Obviously not to the extent maybe I can do today, but it certainly was like my first window into how does science happens, and then how does it make its way to humans, and how do we make all these decisions? You have to remember, you and I come out of the generation of the cholesterol generation, and fat is bad, and cholesterol is bad, and so this is all like all these ideas of. We also come out of the antibiotics show where antibiotics were given with Spence candy, and so I just developed this. It's very similar to what I was saying earlier. I just want to know.
Yeah,
everyone like, and I remember very early on,
curiosity, honestly.
Like, but my doctor would say, and this is way before integrative and functional medicine was where it is today. And my doctors would say things, and I'm like, I just don't believe you.
Right.
I don't believe, and not because I was like upset that my mom was sick, but I was like, I don't believe that you're working from a full set or full understanding of this. And it feels like you're just saying the thing you said in the last patient, or what 5 papers did you yourself read this past week to enrich your own understanding? And I became very frustrated with the medical profession's lack of keeping up with science in some capacity. I became very frustrated with how people who need science, i.e. clinical trials and clinical research at that time, you have to remember, of course, it's much better and more sophisticated now, found their way to even good science and find their way to clinical trials because it was very not centralized on the internet the way it is today. And I also just started realizing like how many decisions we make every day for our health that are informed by stupidity.
Yeah. No, it's true.
And then when all of the fat and cholesterol, like all that stuff, and I would watch how like lobbying groups would just basically like control the way the American public understood something like sugar or like smoking or this. And you have to remember, as I said, I was a very subversive, very combative, very rebellious kid and teenager. And I was just like, I just don't buy any of this. And that became like, I somehow became over many years the person that would never, not dispense medical advice by any stretch, but people would just start asking me things because I was good at researching them.
Sure.
That was it. Right. What do you think of this? And I remember in college, people would ask me, this supplementation wasn't what it is today, right? People would ask me about this, and I would just do a lot of research because it was fascinating to me. And so my like side hustle, like just was always like just wanting to understand this stuff. And then I got a taste of much closer glimpse into biotech and pharma with my ex-boyfriend because he worked at a number of pharma companies. And I started to really understand the way that drugs were developed. And I got very close with a number of the like truly extraordinary scientists that he was working with. At that time, it was like in multiple myeloma research. Yeah. And I started to understand how clinical trials worked. And I think for a long time, and one really important point when my mom was sick, even though she, of course, came out of a very Western medical system because she was working at Memorial Sloan Kettering, when you're dying, you will literally try anything.
Yeah, I have a friend that's dying.
There were people coming in I had Reiki healers coming through our house. We had like crazy like bovine supplements coming from like Belgium. Like we had people like, my mom's friend like flew to Paris to go get some crazy thing that she was going to try. Like you will try no matter what you believe, you will literally try anything.
It's true.
And so I got a much closer than up at that time, also up glimpse into the more integrative and functional, at that time people would call it woo-woo or Eastern world. Sure. Because of course she was trying everything. And so I started to also look at the disparity between the East and the West. Started to try and understand and reconcile why they were at such odds with each other too. And so then it was very interesting. I cut forward to working at Spring, having a very fast growing mobile app, being very sexy, funded by LVMH and like all those sexy. I say sexy.
No, I know what you mean.
I have air quotes for all the people listening. Sexy things that one would, but also in being a woman in tech, some of those things like were meaningful, right? Like you become a role model for a lot of, it's hard, certainly now easier, but like at that time it was also still a little bit challenging. And I had a miscarriage and it really was like, which by the way, I'm one of the rare people that kind of think those are one of the more beautiful biological things that can happen. Of course, it's very sad if you have want a child, of course, but the idea that our own biology knows that isn't viable is an extraordinary gift.
Yes.
And a wisdom that our biology offers us. And so it wasn't that, yes, I was of course sad, but I also felt that it was like, there was something that triggered for me that life wasn't viable, but like the life I was living wasn't viable. There was something that felt out of alignment, didn't feel right. I was killing myself for a mobile app. Right. I was like, what am I? I'm so much smarter than, what am I doing? Like I need to go back.
This doesn't mean anything to me.
Yes, this doesn't mean, no, the people I worked with meant things to me. I care. It was meaningful in the sense of being the early and being the pioneer piece. There's an intellectual piece, but from a heart and existential place, that's not what I want to create.
Right.
And I think you get to a point where you've made enough things or you've done enough things, whether it's jobs or just lived some more years.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what the fuck am I doing? I'm just like, literally, what the fuck am I doing?
True. It's so true.
I think at every decade or every period of time, you have these just, what the fuck am I doing moments.
Yes. It was when I had Sky, when I had my first son, and then solidified when I had my second son.
Absolutely.
Like, and what's taking you from your life, right?
Absolutely.
And how that time.
And what is the life that you want to cultivate?
All the things.
And I think especially women, because there's a lot of, and particularly in the worlds I was in, your identity also, and your identity is, your brand is literally your name, right? Like your identity is really tied up in some of this stuff. And it wasn't because I was like some egomaniac. It's just that your identity becomes like, if I'm not doing this, then like really, who am I and what am I? What does that mean? And I think that for whatever reason, sometimes you have these moments that, like, whether it was the miscarriage or it was the timing, and it was the confluence of things, it was a pivotal trigger, the catalyst that became for me, what do I want to create? And it was very interesting. Around that same time, I actually got pregnant very shortly after that. And it was around that same time that I met my co-founder, Raja, and I had been tracking the microbiome, again, just as somebody who was nerdy in that space, been tracking the microbiome for a while. He had been tracking it since 2006. And I think we just met each other at a moment where I realized, and I felt very similar to the mobile phone.
Yeah.
The microbiome to me was like this framework change, right? This entirely new way. Look, we've studied human biology for centuries, millennia actually. And it was like we were only looking at the human part of us.
Mm-hmm.
And yet 50% of the cells in our body are not human.
Right.
And I was like, oh, there's another half of us that we don't know about,
Right.
that we're starting. And I was like, this is it. This is it. And the more I understood it, and the more I immersed in it, and the more he and I spent understanding what that was going to look like and what we predicted for the future, which, by the way, I'm proud to say when I go back to our early decks, is all happening. It fundamentally is, I was like, I could spend the rest of my life in this field if I needed to. This is going to, but it's not even, this is going to change. It's like genomics.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
like genetics.
yeah. Like this, I'm making a difference in the lives of every person at this point.
Absolutely. But and it was just like, and also the revelation of understanding of our bodies, of disease, of the way we need to live. And then of course the seed, which is how we got our name. I was pregnant when we started the company, and seeding is the process by which you first receive your foundational microbes that basically become the blueprint for your GI and immune system, and of course set in place that your health trajectory of what your life is going to be from a health perspective. And the idea that, and we started off really focused on the early window of life where you can make a huge impact. That work will hit in the next couple of years. It's been a long kind of R&D process. Became to me, I was like, whoa, I could create a company, take all of my tech brain and create a platform, create like the biotech piece of this, which is the part of our company that most people know, our green jar. And then below the water, the ice, everyone sees the iceberg. They're like, oh, cool, Instagram, great green jar, right. Awesome product.
Yes.
Below the water is like a biotech company that like develops drugs, has one of the best bioinformatics teams in the world, has one of the most robust scientific microbiome boards in the world, works on all kinds of crazy future stuff. And of course is probably the part that I'm the most proud of.
Yeah.
But above the water and in the part that you talked about and what sits on social media and people know
branding,
us for.
Which is so important, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been like my most beautiful like storytelling exercise of my life, right? The opportunity to bring together the things I deeply care about, but obviously to do it all from the place of I get to impact people's lives every day. Like I get to impact people's health. And that is like truly the most extraordinary and exciting, I think, part of it, which is like, it's no longer about converting someone to like a purchase, right? Yeah. It's like I get to look at every day, like just today, like I could pull up our Slack channel, 5 more people being like, this changed my life. And I think that the ability to combine, of course, I couldn't have done it without my co-founder who oversees like all of the R&D and science programs that we do. And when I think about that, I was able to call that in, and we, as you said, timing is everything. And we met at a moment where the field was just the velocity of this field was taking off. And then the opportunity to take what I really am proud of is like a really new approach and taking all of my tech brain and the design and all of these things that just come together through the lens of this new world of the microbiome. I do pinch myself every day because I truly get to create the future. And that's like a beautiful thing.
Like whenever Roger and I get to talk to you, where I was like, I can't wait to talk to Ara to figure out how her world domination is going to what's next? What is she changing in my life? What is she changing in the world? And
I can't change anything for Roger next, but I can tell you that it's going to change a lot of women's lives next.
I am so excited. And it's funny because I can't tell you how many times I've been in a room where people are like, oh my God, you guys, I was feeling so not well. And I started taking this thing called Seed. Have you heard of it? And I literally just feel like I love it because I think part of being an entrepreneur is starting with an idea, finding enough people that believe you,
Right.
and then watching it grow like a seed, right?
Yes.
And so I just watching this grow from the beginning, and obviously having known you from different parts of life and work, but it's just, to me, it's the most unique to you and so on brand for Ara Katz. Which, by the way, anyone who called you Ara, that is not right. It is Ara. And so I had
Thank
to
you.
completely retrain myself, by the way.
Thank you for saying that. It's
Yeah.
I hope you, but you do appreciate that. Like, it's funny. You probably had this too, where people give you compliments or they say those things, but I believe you, but I don't believe you.
I believe you, but
It's
that's
like,
cute. Like, I think
yeah,
that's, you're
but like,
doing great, honey.
but I'm like, do people really say that? Because you always
Yes.
want, it's, as you said at the beginning, the top is not, I don't even see the top of the mountain.
Well,
And so
you
it's
don't,
funny. It's a funny feeling.
you don't see the top, and I don't think anyone, I really don't think, I have very few people in my life that perceive themselves as being at the top, because I think most people that are at the top want to go to a higher top, right? But I think that's the beauty. Like I always say, my anxiety is my superpower, right? Because the minute I get complacent, oh, I'm here, I'm good. No, no, no. What's
Totally.
next? We got to do more. Like, we got to do more and we got to do better. But at the same time, I think that the way I look at your path is every single bit of your, from a very young age, whether it's sports, your education, public school to private school, all the things. The thing that I think is really important to note is that every part of that has been a brick in the house that you're living in now.
Absolutely.
And I would like to know, certainly before we go, I'd really love to know, like, what has been really for you one of the greatest challenges that you've had? Like, what sort of keeps you awake at night? Because you are a high strung person. You're a very bohemian Zen person, but you're also high strung and like this driven force that like really is not stoppable. So I feel like, what are the things that, what has been the greatest challenge? You and I have talked about too many men in the room. And then when there was women in the room, those women pretended to want to support you, but actually didn't. Because I know I've experienced that.
Yes.
But so what has been your greatest challenge, if there's one, or it could be two, or it could be none, but I'm curious.
It's a few things. I think one of them is that there are so many things that I want to do with Seed because I see so many opportunities for impact.
Yeah.
And you can't do them all.
You can't. You can, but like one at a time.
Yes.
Because that's, I think as an entrepreneur, that's the sort of thing that I think we
Yes.
trip over the most. It's like too many things at once because your brain
Yes.
is about to explode.
And I think I have to get comfortable with what happens when you're larger and you're maybe making a bigger impact.
Yeah.
But it doesn't. I am a Raja and myself are both like what we would call individual. We'll be calling the company world individual contributors, which is a way of saying, which is a way of saying that we would be horrible to be managed.
Yeah.
But that doesn't. But we love to do things ourselves.
Yes.
And this is a typical pain,
Yes.
I think, that a lot of founders see when you scale.
Yeah. One of the biggest,
But I think that there's certain things that you have to let go of so that you can actually make a greater impact.
Yep.
I think that's certainly one thing that I lose sleep over because there's so many things that I believe we could be doing that I'd really like to be doing, or I like to be doing faster.
That's always been my issue.
I think that's certainly, yes. But I do have that Zen part of me, like that grounded part of me that also does believe that you do things as you need. And I don't mean this in like the universe like way.
Yeah.
Because I'm too controlling for it to think the universe does these things, does anything. But I think that is something that I have to reconcile as a creator, for sure. And then I think the second thing has probably much more to do with being a parent, actually, and doing Seed, which is, I think, has a lot more to do with like all the things that I want to be doing for my children and how I feel like I would like to be showing up.
Yeah.
And really like the reconciliation of what I am able to do in this moment.
Yep.
And getting okay with that. I think that in some ways takes up more of my
of
brain.
course.
And that's the most really a very
No.
honest answer. And like realizing that like what really loses out, and I'll give you the most honest answer, is my relationship, is my marriage.
Yeah.
Because I have seed and I have children, and then you're just like, and my showers are on my calendar.
Yes.
And you're
I shower at midnight.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah, I
But
shower.
it's also like my happy place
Me
because
too.
no one bothers me.
Exactly.
So it's like, it's more like 10:30 in my house, but like it's the same idea. And there is, for someone who needs to, it's not even about winning, but who wants to keep going and has things to build.
Yes.
There is a moment where you have to reconcile, like where you have to stop.
Of course.
Even just in a day, right? Like what time to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Can you show up to this child's thing and this child? Can you
go with your husband to the thing, or does he?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just like that ongoing negotiation and getting to a place of peace with it, that you're just like, you know what? I'm going to do what I can do today, which actually is my greatest contradiction. If you want to talk about contradictions, because I am the person that's, no, let's just get to the next campsite by the sunset. We can do it.
Right.
Versus being like, let's just set up camp here because it's okay.
Sure.
To wait, right? Just as an analogy.
Yeah.
And I think children are beautiful teachers in this way. Like they're the greatest teachers. Yeah. And I think that I have my greatest like angst really comes from, it's not the wanting to do it all like typical trope.
No.
It's just the like, it's very challenging of like, it's much more of a way that I would it's letting go in some ways of just saying that in this particular moment, and I take it in small increments of time. I try to, like, for the next 3 to 6 months, this is the reality of where my limitations are.
Sure.
And that's a hard thing for me to acknowledge.
I would pretty much say that it is the most common thread that a challenge would be that pull and that guilt on all sides between a mom. And listen, I think it was Serena Williams that said it when she had to quit, right? Because she wanted to have another baby. And she was like, if I was a guy, I wouldn't have to make this choice right now. And I remember when she said that, because I was like, yeah, that's 1,000% true. And it is most definitely my greatest challenge, of course. I think since I had kids, it's like, how do you be this 100% present mom, right? And how do you be this 100% present CEO or whatever you are? And the reality of it is, most of the time you actually can't. And it's, so you're going to feel the pull on either side. And I think, but it's to your point, it's how do you reconcile that? And I do think that the husband for sure gets, what does Roger always say? Short end of stick.
Yes.
And hi, I'm short end of stick. And I'm like,
that's amazing.
Yes, but you got me for 18 years to yourself. And when they go to college, you have me back. Just give me a little patience right here.
100%.
But it's hard.
There's also, and then there's like just the existential part of it as a woman, right? As somebody
How much
who's
do
like,
we have? How much do we have?
But there's a beautiful quote by Carl Jung that says, the greatest burden on a child is the unlived life of the parent. And there's another part of it, which is, I think there is the like do it all. And there's one level of that. But there's also like an aspect of like you, Rachel, as a human, as a woman, as a creator, as an artist. You have things that you, not just for building a business, but as a human, there's things you want to like, just for yourself that you want to be. And it was funny. I received an email from Pax's my 8-year-old's science teacher recently. He said, Pax just told me about all the amazing research that you're doing in with microbes. And he said that you sent some microbes up to space that apparently eat plastic. And he also mentioned that you're doing some other environmental research with microbes. And he just turned 8. So he said this when he was 7.
Of course.
And she went on and on about all the things that seed is doing. And then I had this moment that I was like, this also means something to my children.
I'm doing something right. And this is like, getting...
Yes. And he understands like what I do
and cared
and felt proud of it. And she also said, he's so proud of you. And it was just like, and so I do have moments like that where I'm also just really reminded that the doing of what I'm doing also feels impactful,
Mhm.
even if it takes away time of certain other things that are really meaningful. And there, what I also know is, and you probably know this, as in you can't make everybody happy all the
No,
time.
you can't. And it's the
And
hardest lesson to learn, I think, for women.
it is.
I really do. And I think we don't ever stop learning it. And I don't know that there's a point we just throw our hands in the air and be like, I'm sorry, fuck off for now, because this is all I can do right now. You just go, this is all I can do right now. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, hold
Right.
it. But I think you're doing great. You're changing the world. You're changing the lives and the health of so many people in so many ways. And I'm lucky that I do have a little bit of a window as to what's next, but I can't wait for what's next. And I can't wait for the rest of the world and all the seed diehards. And if you're not a diehard seed person, you need to be a diehard seed person, because it changes the way you feel every single day. I really
you.
do. My dad's even taking them. 86,
Amazing.
my dad is taking seed. Just started. First thing my dad's ever actually done for his health, by the way.
It's funny. I hear so many people say, I literally can't get my parents to do any of the things that I tell them to do,
Not true.
but I got them to take seed.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, kind of funny. Yeah, and I have a lot of beautiful stories that we hear from the children of like older people who talk about the impact on their parents' life, which is really cool.
I love it. Ara, I love and adore you as a human, as a badass, and all the things. And I love your brain.
Thank you.
It's that time in the show when I answer 2 listener questions. So let's see what we have today. Okay, what TV shows are you watching currently? And do you like The Crown? Honestly, you will laugh so hard. It's so embarrassing. I have a teenager, which I say that as if it's my excuse, but I really am a closet teenager when it comes to shows and movies. I'm currently rewatching Gossip Girl, and I'm actually even more obsessed with it the second time, which is even more embarrassing. I have already watched Outer Banks twice. I have watched the After series, which is like literally like a teenage book series. And Bridgerton multiple times, both seasons. Can't wait for the third. And I think that's about it. I have seen The Crown. I saw the beginning. I don't know how many seasons there are, but I have not watched the most recent season. But it's always weird for me when actors are switched. Like it's very hard for me. I've always struggled with that. Like when they do that in movie, like trilogies or series, like it's weird for me to get into a new person pretending to be the same person from the last season. So I feel like that's kind of bothering me a little bit, even though I think she probably looks a little bit more like Princess Diana. So I have not watched the most recent, but I definitely think I will. But I will say this very admittedly, when it comes to TV shows, I really need to watch things that aren't dark and heavy. It's very hard for me because life is really dark and heavy in a lot of ways. And I don't watch a lot of TV. So I find that if I have the privilege of getting into bed quietly at like 11 o'clock, I'll literally turn on something. And when it's really good and like kind of mindless and I can just like fall into like a silly love story, like a boy meets girl romance, I'm so happy, because sometimes you really just want to see a happily ever after or relive your like teenage romance life. I don't know. I was a big teenage romance person in my real life. So I think part of me just really enjoys that. Okay, so next, what is my Starbucks order? I've been asked this so many times over the years, and I have to tell you, you are going to be so upset with the answer because it couldn't be more boring. It's literally a venti English breakfast tea. I cannot drink coffee because of my acid reflux, although I do love it and would actually swim in a river of coffee if I could, but I can't. It just hurts me too much. So I drink venti tea with a little bit of half and half or sometimes some almond milk. But yeah, not exciting, but it really works and I really enjoy it. And I feel very English, but not really. Okay. Don't forget to submit your questions for next week's episode. All you have to do is DM us your questions to @ClimbingInHeelsPod on Instagram, and I might just answer your question. Thank you so much to Ara for coming on the pod. Her story, honestly, I thought I knew a lot about her, and I actually knew nothing about her. I find it so incredible with some of these really successful women, and truly, like, you know, Ara is a truly unstoppable force for all the best reasons. And I think we really talked about everything from, you know, growing up in Manhattan and, you know, feeling like she really didn't have very much compared to kids that she was surrounded by, and that her jump from public to private school, even though it was a huge strain on her parents, ultimately did change her life. And I think that what really sets Ara apart from so many people that I know is that her intellectual curiosity, really about so many things, from like film and building and, you know, athletics to microbiome in the body and how it changes everything about your overall health. But coming from tech, and successful tech at that, is so fascinating to me, because she's pivoted from so many different things, and not because she necessarily needed to, but because she had such an overwhelming, polarizing desire to do something that felt fulfilling from a human perspective, and just sort of needed to really fill her cup more in terms of like what her overall mission in life was. And I think as someone who is most definitely a workaholic and a mother of 2 boys and has a husband, you know, I think she very honestly talks about the struggle being very, very real. And I think not that many people talk openly about that, because it is real, and it is real, and someone is going to get hurt, and someone is going to feel left out, because I think as one woman, you cannot be all things to all people. And that means your kids, that means your husband, that means your job, that means as a school mom, that means as a CEO, that means your team. And, you know, in Ara's case, certainly with investors and a board, and it's a lot to carry. It's a lot to carry. And I think it's very important to highlight those things, because I think it's important to know that not everyone's picture is perfect, and the struggles are real, and everyone has them. It's just everyone's look different. So if it looks easy, I can tell you it's not. And I loved talking to Ara. I learned so much today. She is, I don't know, she's mind-boggling and mind-blowing and so impressive, and I just admire her so, so, so much. If you want more Climbing in Heels content, follow me on @RachelZo and @Climbing in Heels Pod on Instagram for more updates on upcoming guests, episodes, and all things Curator. I will see you all next week. Mwah.